Hello and welcome to Technical Penguin. In this video, I'll show you how to make this battery bracket for securing a battery to a Ryobi 48-volt mowers battery tray. I'll be using the DCHouse 100 amp hour metal case battery, but you can use this for other batteries too. Up here, I have the old style DCHouse 50 amp hour battery. They no longer make this model, but you can still get it from EcoWorthy. And here I have the DCHouse 100 amp hour plastic case battery. It works equally well for all of these. Is this necessary? No. You can secure your battery using ratchet straps or other methods, but I think this gives it a nice professional look. I'm going to be making this using angle iron, but it could also be made using angled aluminum, which is easier to work with. Either way, it only requires basic tools. I'll leave a list of all the tools and materials needed in the description. Okay, let's get started. The way we're going to build this is we're going to have two pieces of angle iron that are facing in, and then we're going to have perpendicular to that two pieces of angle iron that are facing out. And then they're going to overlap in the corner, and we're going to put a bolt through in each corner to attach them. So how do you decide on which side of the battery we're going to have the angle iron facing in and which side we're going to have it facing out? Well, it's just going to depend on the battery. And I'll give you a little cheat code for that, which is on the 100 amp hour models, you'll want this end, the shorter end, to be facing in and the longer end to be facing out. And on the 50 amp hour model, it is the opposite of that. So on the 50 amp hour model, you'll do something like this. This is not going to work on the 100 amp hour model because it actually interferes with the handle and it winds up not sitting flush with the top. With the 50 amp hour model, you can't do this configuration because it winds up being too big for the battery tray. So we're doing a 100 amp hour model here. This is a DCHouse 100 amp hour with the metal case. It'll be similar with the plastic case. So this side, the shorter side for the 100 amp hour model, you'll want to measure that, and this measures 10.5 inches, and then you'll add 2 inches to it to give you that space for the overlap on each end. Okay, so we're going to cut this piece for 12.5, and we need 2 of those. And for this side, it's going to depend on what metal you're using. We're going to be using 1-inch angle iron. So it's 1 inch on this side, 1 inch on this side, and 1/8 of an inch thick. So theoretically, this should be 7/8 of an inch on the inside. However, if you look closely, you can see there's a bit of a radius in there. So if we took another piece of angle iron and we tried to put it up against that edge, it's going to stick out about 1/16 of an inch. Now, not all angle iron has this radius. It's going to depend on where you get it. You can see this angle iron, this is an offset angle. This doesn't have that radius. And if we try to put a piece of metal in there, it'll sit flush. Most of the time, you're going to find this angle iron. If you're getting aluminum or you are near a metal specialty shop, you might be able to find this angle iron without an inside edge. So you're going to want to check your metal for that before you take your measurements. Now, the angle iron that I have, it has this radius. And we already said that prevents us from sticking about 1/16 of an inch into the corner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 1/16 of an inch for each of my sides. Now when I cut this piece, I'm going to cut it 1/16 of an inch short on each side. This measures 19 inches long, so I'm going to cut this for 15 7/8. That allows me, when I put the next piece over it, to have it sit flush and account for the radius on the inside of this piece. So for this battery, the DCHouse 100 amp hour metal case, I'm going to need 2 pieces that are 12.5 inches long for these ends, and I'm going to need 2 pieces that are 15 7/8 inches long for these sides. I'm going to go ahead and cut those now. This is the saw I use for cutting metal. You could use a grinder if you have a steady hand, a hacksaw if you have the patience, or if you have the money, you could buy a dedicated metal saw. But I don't cut enough metal to justify getting one, so I use an old Makita miter saw, and I use it with a metal cutoff abrasive wheel. Now these wheels are made of an abrasive material that wears down as you cut. As you can see here from an older one, this one is wear down significantly since it was new. So this one, this one's not good enough to use anymore. It's not going to make a full cut because it's gotten too small. So I'm going to use a new one for this. Now, if you are going to use a saw like this for cutting, make sure that the blade that you get, that the RPM rating on the blade is compatible with the RPM rating of the saw. You'll want to do this in an area where there's nothing flammable, and you'll also want to remove the dust bag because you don't want any sparks getting in there and catching the dust bag on fire. You'll also want to make sure you wear eye protection. So I'm going to go ahead and set this up and make a cut. I've lined up my mark, so I'm going to go ahead and cut it. One thing I really like about this saw is it has a guard that completely covers the blade. Be careful handling the metal after you've cut it because it's likely to be hot. You're also likely to have burrs form on the edge like this. Even on a factory edge, there may be a small burr that you can't see easily, but if you run your finger across, you can feel it. Just use a file to clean up the edge, and you'll know you're finished when you don't feel any roughness there anymore. Now that the metal is cut, we're going to want to do a dry fit. So go ahead and put your angle iron that's facing inward in place. It'll sit right on the battery. And then you'll want to use some clamps. I like to use these spring clamps. Either size works. And I use those to hold the side pieces in. Once you have everything in place, just give it a squeeze to make sure that everything is sitting where it's supposed to. And you can check on the sides, check the alignment for your corners. Make sure that you have everything where you want it to be. This is not the final fit, so you'll have room to adjust it later. What we're checking for here is just to make sure that everything is cut properly before we go on to the next step. So once you have everything in place, you kind of want to jiggle it a little bit, make sure that you don't have extra play in there, and you can even lift it up, and you can kind of get an idea of what it's going to look like when we're finished. Now we need to drill some holes for our corners. We're going to start by drilling pilot holes in these end pieces that sit on top, and then we're going to use those pilot holes to mark where we're going to drill holes for these pieces that sit underneath. Now we have the metal in a vise. Notice the way this is oriented. The battery would be sitting right here. So we're going to measure from here and here, 7/16 of an inch. Now that we have a mark, you'll want to take a punch and put it right where those lines intersect. And then hit it once firmly with a hammer. Then add a couple drops of cutting oil to the top. If you don't have cutting oil, you can use a different kind of oil. Then take your drill, align it into the divot you made, and start drilling. You'll want a gentle amount of force at a moderate speed. Then take a rag and clean up the oil and metal shavings. Now repeat this for the other 3 corners. Once you have your holes drilled in all 4 corners, you'll want to clamp everything together again. Again, press in the corners and make sure that everything is lined up how you want it. It's important to do it now. This won't be our final fit, but we are going to mark the holes for the bottom. So it's important to make sure everything is properly lined up. When you're clamping, make sure that the clamp is not blocking the hole. Once you have everything where you want it, take your drill, and you'll want to drill just a little bit. You're not going to drill all the way through, just enough to make a mark. And you'll want to do this in each of the 4 corners. Now we've moved our piece over to the vise, and you can see there's a small indentation from the drill bit. Apply a couple drops of cutting oil, and then using the same 1/8 inch drill bit, make sure the drill bit is in the divot and drill a hole. Go ahead and wipe away the shavings and oil. Next, we're going to use a step drill to drill the hole out to 1/4 inch. On this particular step drill, the first step is 3/16 and the second step is 1/4 inch. So that's where we're going to drill to. Go ahead and add a couple more drops of cutting oil. Position your step drill in the hole and drill it to 1/4 inch. Go ahead and wipe off the shavings and the oil. Confirm your fit by putting a 1/4 inch bolt through the hole. Once you flip it over, you might notice some burrs on the other side of the hole. Just use a file to flatten that down. And once you've filed it down, you may notice that you now have a little bit of burrs on the inside of the hole. Just quickly run your step drill into the hole to clean that up. Go ahead and repeat this for the other 3 holes. We still have our 4 original holes, so let's drill those out to 1/4 inch as well. And just as the other ones, be sure to clean up the back as well. Now that the holes are drilled, we can assemble the bracket. Start by placing 1/4 inch by 3/4 inch bolts through the top pieces. Next, rotate the top pieces and place the bottom pieces onto the bolts. Next, place a lock washer on each bolt. Add a nut to each bolt, tightening a few threads. Place the bracket on the battery, then tighten all the bolts. Once everything is tightened, the bracket should fit snugly, but lift off. So now we've got our battery tray, everything removed and clean, and we can put our new bracket on the battery tray, you'll want to figure out where you want the battery to sit. Some people prefer it to be all the way at the back of the mower like this. If you do that, then you can put bolts here and here. Some people prefer it to be all the way to the front of the mower like this. If you do that, you can put bolts here and here. I like to put it right in the middle. And I could probably get away with just one bolt on each side, but I prefer to put 4 bolts on there. So I'm going to have it something like this, and then I'm going to put a bolt here and a bolt here on each side. We're going to put pilot holes in our bracket, but before we can do that, we need to figure out where they're going to go. We can measure and see that these cross pieces are 13 3/4 inches apart. So we're going to want to make sure that our holes are 13 3/4 inches apart. Next, you'll want to measure your bracket. These can vary a bit, but mine is 19 1/4. If I subtract 13 3/4 from 19 1/4, I get 5 1/2, and then I divide that in half, and that tells me that I will put my holes 2 3/4 inches from the end. Since we know our angle iron is 1 inch wide, we can actually make our mark at 1 3/4. You'll want the holes to be 7/16 in from the outside. I've propped the bracket up on some 2x4s. Now you'll want to take a center punch and line it up right where your lines intersect and give one firm tap. Then you can move the 2x4 down a little bit, add a couple drops of cutting oil, and then just like we did before, position your drill bit in that divot and drill the hole. Use a rag to wipe off the shavings and oil. And then you'll want to repeat this for the other 3 corners. I've laid the battery tray upside down, and I've laid the bracket upside down on top of the battery tray. This will allow us to transfer the holes from the bracket to the tray. Once I have the bracket where I want it, I'll secure it with a couple spring clamps. Now that I have everything clamped down and where I want it, I'm going to use that same 1/8 inch drill bit and drill in each hole just enough to make a mark. Now that we've made our marks, we can remove the spring clamps and the bracket. Place a piece of wood under the edge of the battery tray to add some stability. Then for each of the holes, add a couple drops of cutting oil and drill the hole the rest of the way through. Be sure to wipe the shavings and oil away. Now we'll use a step drill to drill our holes out to 3/8 of an inch. On this step drill, that's the 4th step. Add a couple drops of oil. Because this is a larger hole, you may need to add more oil as you're cutting. You'll want to drill until you just start the 4th step. We got to the 2nd step, we're going to add a little bit more oil. Now we're about halfway through the 3/8 inch step. We're going to wipe the shavings and oil off and flip the tray over. Now we can add a little bit more oil and finish cutting from this side. Wipe the shavings and oil off. Now you can see when we flip it back over, there's minimal burring. If you still have a little bit of burr, you can continue to drill just a little bit, just to take that off. And when you're finished, take a 3/8 inch bolt and make sure it passes through cleanly. Repeat this for the rest of the holes. And do the same thing for the 4 holes in the bracket. We're going to install 4 3/8 coupling nuts on the battery tray in order to secure the battery. These are 1 3/4 inch long. A lot of the times you'll find 1 inch and 1/8 inch, so make sure you find the extra long ones. They get secured to the battery tray using 1-inch bolts. This is a cap bolt. I like this because I think it gives a nice clean finish, but you can also use a regular 3/8 by 1 inch bolt. You'll want to use lock washers to make sure everything stays in place. I'll be using internal teeth star washers. When you install these, you want the teeth to face towards the nut or the bolt and the smooth side to face towards the battery tray. You can also use a split ring washer. Go ahead and prepare your bolt by putting a lock washer under the head. If it has teeth, make sure the teeth are pointing towards the head. Insert your bolt from the bottom of the battery tray. Add your lock washer, making sure any teeth face out. Then add your coupling nut. Use a couple wrenches to secure it. Repeat this for the other 3 holes. Our last step before installing the battery is to add some neoprene foam. This is a 1/8 inch by 1 inch neoprene foam. You can use your battery bracket as a guide. Place it on top of the coupling nuts, and then use a couple extra bolts to align it. If you find your holes are not perfectly aligned, don't worry. There is a little bit of play in the coupling nuts to get them better aligned, and if they're a little bit off, it's not really going to matter. Attach the neoprene foam to all the battery tray areas inside the bracket. Now we can remove the bolts and the battery bracket. Then put the battery on the tray. This is easiest when it's on the ground. Now we have the battery positioned on the tray. We're going to add the bracket. To secure the bracket, we're going to be using 3/8 by 8.5 inch hex bolts. 8.5 is a less common size. I found these on Zorro. I'll provide a link. If you're unable to get 8.5 inch bolts, you can get 9 inch bolts and just cut them down to size. You'll want to make sure you add a nut on before you cut it so that as you remove the nut, it will clean up the threads. You'll want to make sure to use a lock washer under the bolt head. In this case, I'm going to use a split washer because the star washers that I have don't fit over this shoulder. And then just insert the bolt through the bracket and secure it to the coupling nut. Leave it a little bit loose and go ahead and get all the other bolts started. Once all the bolts are installed, finish tightening the bolts. What you're aiming for is to just squash the washer. You don't want to go too far, particularly on a plastic case battery, because the battery will start to bulge out. And that's all there is to it. You may have noticed I didn't paint this. I usually don't, but you can. in a nice black or lime green to match the mower, it would look really good. I hope you enjoyed this video. For more tips and information on your Ryobi 48 volt mower, check out technicalpenguin.net. Thanks for watching.